Yep. And she's squirting all over the place. Okay. This is not my thing. Okay. I
And
wrestle.
real quick,
Yeah.
Ken,
Yeah.
you don't want to use a tourniquet there.
No, you do not. No,
Okay,
I knew
just to be
that.
sure. Hey, neck tourniquets are very effective at stopping bleeding,
Hmm.
but there are some treatment
Some
consequences.
side things. Yes.
Welcome to episode 17 of the Frugal Firearms Podcast, the podcast that is here to help you get the most for your money, for your shooting dollar, across not just firearms, but the entirety of the shooting sports industries. I'm joined today by Ken. Ken, say hello.
Hello, listeners. Appreciate you guys coming back, and I think we've got a very interesting show to talk to today.
So we've talked a lot about going to SHOT Show, and that's where we mine a lot of our prospects for doing podcasts. And when you walk that show, it's something like 860,000 square feet of floor space. And when you're
Mhm.
walking this show, you come across they kind of organize things categorically. And there's stuff on the upper floor, which are the big, expensive displays by companies like Smith and Wesson and Glock and stuff like that. And then there's a lot of other companies that occupy smaller booths, generally down on the first floor. Some of them are startups, some of them are established, but don't want to spend literally $200,000 on setting up a display. And I walk every foot of the entire floor space as part of my dedication to you listeners. And one room has medical gear. It's not one of the bigger rooms. And I kind of want you to think for a second about maybe why that is. I mean, yes, it's a firearms show, but one thing that I found there was this one particular table by a company called Rescue Essentials. And Rescue Essentials had a lot of things out that were training aids, not just things that you would use literally in the field, but things to help you learn how to use those things in the field. So I stopped and had a rather long conversation with the gentleman who was standing there, who was very gracious with his time, a gentleman named Dr. Dana Onifer. Dr. Onifer spent probably across 2 days about 45 minutes talking to me. And when you're at a show that has, like I said, 860,000 square feet of floor space, spending that much time with anybody is really quite an investment. So I asked Dr. Onifer to come on and join us on the show because I think that a topic that is just ignored way too much in the shooting industry is your medical EDC gear and what you should really have. Because when you think about the probability of needing a firearm, in fact, I'm going to ask you, Ken, what do you carry a firearm for? What is your purpose in carrying a firearm?
My purpose of having my CCW and carrying my firearm is an emergency situation that might arise in the most unlikely of scenarios. I mean, I hate to say it, church, going to the movie theater, whatever it might be, but it is to protect myself and my family and others if I can.
Okay. So you're carrying a firearm,
Hmm.
even though it seems a little bit maybe backwards, as a life-saving tool.
Yes, like a fire extinguisher.
But how many people, but are you then also prepared to handle the more likely scenario of you come across a medical emergency? Or let's just say that you have to use that firearm in anger. Are you ready to render aid to those who also may be at the scene and who are injured?
Well, interesting question. I mean, if I'm at the range, I have a medical kit, with me at the range, which has tourniquets and various other things, which would be for only immediate stuff until we get the professionals there. But yeah, this is an area that I'm certain I have not given enough attention to, and it's something I'm very much looking forward to hearing the doctor talk about.
And with that, we'll bring on Dr. Dana Onifer from Rescue Essentials. And Doctor, welcome to the show. And we'd like to get a little bit of your background. How did you become associated with Rescue Essentials? What is your interest and background? Why are you taking your time to talk to us today?
Well, hi Craig, hi Ken. Thanks for having me on. So a little bit of backstory. I spent 33 years in the Navy. I did 12 of those years as a hospital corpsman with Marine Force Recon. And then, thank you for paying your taxes. I went to medical school on the taxpayer dollar at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, USU, or we just call it USU, in Bethesda, Maryland, which is the government's medical school. And graduated class of 2005, and then went back to being the doctor for Marine Force Recon Unit, and then was at MARSOC. Um, Retired in 2022, and I've been involved with the medical research organization, or I should say, the medical research infrastructure within the military. And at those events, you have lots of trade show vendors that set up their stuff. I became good friends with a bunch of those different people, and one of them in particular, when I retired, she said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Not a whole lot right now." And she said, There's these people. I think they're really good people, and they could use some help with some product development and getting some exposure to the military. Would you like to consult for them?" And I said, "Sure." And so I first met those folks in May of 2025 at the Special Operations Medical Association conference in Raleigh, and I signed an agreement with them, I think, in July. And so I've been working with them on a part-time basis as a consultant since then, coming up on 2 years.
That sounds like it's well, thank you for your service, your prior service, of course. And it sounds to me like you probably during that tenure were exposed to a lot of things that would make a billy goat puke, right? In terms of the types of injuries and maybe lessons learned about the sort of things that people could have done, but maybe didn't have the training or equipment to do to save their own life or the life of their buddy next to them. Is that a good guess?
So, yeah, I'm not as much as some, more than others, but I think the what's more important from my perspective, what I've done is, um, from a maybe a leadership and education and training and a policy standpoint, is helping to develop the guidelines that that we use throughout the DoD and really internationally. So I spent 9 years on the Committee for Tactical Combat Casualty Care, which is a DoD organization under the Joint Trauma System. And since about 2002, I think, maybe longer than that, they've been the organization that has been uh, delegated the responsibility of creating the guidelines for tactical combat casualty care, or we'll call TC3. Some people call it T-Tri-C. But that is the first aid for combat medicine, and it's also led to interactions with and partnerships with civilian medicine as well. In particular, after the Boston Marathon bombings and the Sandy Hook school shooting, the American College of Surgeons developed the Stop the Bleed campaign, which is modeled. Their treatment guidelines are modeled on the TC3 guidelines. And those guidelines are also used by civilian paramedics, and in particular, like SWAT paramedics and SWAT teams, under the name of Tactical Emergency Casualty Care.
And this is the month of May, coming up on the end of month of May here. So
Yep.
this is still Stop the Bleed month. How often would you say, given your background and all that you've been exposed to, how often is the average person, let's just say the average person for this listening audience is a CCW carrier. Let's just kind of set that as the ground rule for your
Mhm.
average person. How often is that average person going to come across a medical emergency that would require some application of medical experience, training, or equipment, or I suppose all of those three, going uh, against the backdrop of how often would they perhaps need to use their firearm in anger to save the life or some other improvised weapon to save a life. And that could
Right.
be, Ken mentioned being on the range, which is sort of you know, a place where there's a lot of guns and there's therefore a lot of danger with maybe uneducated people or
Yeah.
inexperienced people. But at the same time, I mean, out in the public, probably a lot fewer guns, but there's a lot more risk of other natures out there.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I was doing some research because there's not a lot of really good data on exactly how often that happens. You know, you'll see some numbers that uh, firearms are used somewhere between 1 and 2 million times a year to
Hmm.
prevent violence, right? Or that they are used to actually save someone's life. And the statistics say potentially that many times, and often that's just brandishing, right? Recognize like someone, you say, hey, I've got a gun, and then the bad guy says, okay, I don't want to mess with that, and they just wander off, right? Or they leave. um, so what I looked at some of the numbers that we have available. There's about 150,000 deaths in the US every year from trauma, and somewhere between 60 and 30,000 of those are from bleeding to death.
Hmm.
And that may be a combination of internal and external hemorrhage. So internal, the bleeding is inside your body, right? Like you get a pelvis fracture, or you're, a motor vehicle accident, your liver gets lacerated, and that bleeding is inside. There's nothing I can do about that. But then there's external hemorrhage where I have a cut. That could be a motor vehicle accident as well. That could be an industrial accident. That could be, a lawnmower, farming equipment, whatever. And your blood is now on the ground and is continuing to pour out, and we need to stop that. So that's 30 to 60,000 people that die every year from bleeding that are potentially savable.
Hmm.
Well, let's compare that with CPR and cardiac arrest. In the US, there's about 350,000 people a year that experience out of hospital cardiac arrest, right? So people who drop dead, sudden heart attack.
Yeah.
CPR is not particularly effective. So of those 350,000, about 10% of them will survive.
Really?
Uh,
Oh,
yeah,
I thought the
it's
numbers were a lot better than that.
no, no, not at all.
Oh gosh.
Um, and improvements, the things that will improve a person's likelihood of survival is rapidly starting CPR, right? So
Hmm.
bystander CPR, somebody gets that gets that blood moving,
Hmm.
and rapid use of an AED, an automatic external defibrillator.
Right.
And so that's why everybody gets trained with CPR, and you have AEDs all over the place.
Yeah. They
So,
told us that the best place to get a heart attack was at work because at
right,
work we had
because
the
there's probably an AED there, right,
it's
or the
there
mall
on
or
the
someplace
wall
like
and
that.
the people at work are trained. Yeah.
Yep. So, I make the argument that when you think about this, 30 to 60,000 people that die every year from external hemorrhage, tourniquets are on your worst day. If you've got a good tourniquet and you know how to use it, you're going to be about 60 to 70% reliable, 60 to 70% effective. And if you know what you're doing and you've got a good tourniquet and you use it correctly, you're upwards of 90+%. So you're potentially saving 20 to as high as 55,000 people a year by knowing how to stop the bleed.
Mm.
Um, so, I think it's important for people to know this stuff, whether or not you're going to carry a gun. And obviously that's my bias, right? But in particular, if you are involved or have the potential to be involved in making metal go really fast, right? Now, whether that means you own a gun range,
Hmm.
right? You sell guns, you teach people how to shoot, you carry, any of those people. I think that there's a certain responsibility of being able to deal with the consequences of after the gun goes bang. When metal hits tissue, when metal hits a body, a human person, and does that damage. Craig, you use the term in anger, and I try not to use that. I'll say in extremis, right?
Okay.
Because
I
and
like
and
that
the, and
better.
and
Yeah,
this, some
you're
of
right.
it's kind of philosophical for me. Like
Yeah.
um, from my Christian worldview, I try not to hate anyone. I'm trying to stop a bad guy from doing bad things, and I'd rather
Hmm.
not kill them. But chances are good I've got pretty good shot placement, and they may not survive this encounter.
Yeah, you're right, and I suppose I was just using a colloquial term that
Eh,
is maybe perhaps overused, but you're right. I mean, if you're Actually, if you're angry, you probably have the time to think about something and maybe you should disengage, right? I mean, it's time to
Uh,
because if
Walk
it's just
away is always
reactionary and
best.
you know,
yeah,
the
right,
emotion comes later, right?
right. Because
Um,
it's the best response is to walk away, like if
Yep.
possible, right?
Yep.
Avoid conflict.
or run,
But
but
yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
but
But you mentioned metal going fast. I mean, a car goes fast too, and it's an awful
yep,
lot of
Hmm.
metal.
yeah. So
And
does a chainsaw blade.
right, and
Yeah.
you could, I mean, how often do people come across car accidents? They just drive on by, where
Yeah,
maybe they could have rendered some aid if they knew what they were doing. And actually, your previous statement, you teed up two other points here. Although I'm going to hold those points till later, just in the flow of the conversation. But to pick up on your percentages, okay, how many CCW holders do you estimate? Maybe you have no, solid numbers in this. Maybe it's just a gut feel, which is either one is fine. How many CCW carriers also carry some medical EDC with them regularly in public, where it's
Mhm.
accessible in the time frame that matters? I mean, what's the phrase that I worked for the Navy as well? Technology at the speed of relevance. In other
right,
words, do you have the thing? It may be in your car 100 yards away, which is not going
Oh
to do
yeah.
you a lot of good. Is it really on your
right,
person? Can you really use it?
right. I live in a very military town. I live just outside of Camp Lejeune, and a lot of the people that I know and interact with here who carry are much more likely to have medical equipment, at least a tourniquet with them. And a lot of that's because they're issued this stuff, right? They get a fresh
Hmm.
tourniquet every time they go on a deployment, so they probably got a whole bunch of crap sitting in their garage. But from Shot Show, I've been to Shot Show twice, and in a couple of other venues in talking to people who are involved in the firearms industry and who are avid shooters, gun owners, gun store owners, and stuff like that, or even just to a local gun show, there's very little recognition that maybe I should carry medical equipment. Maybe I should carry a tourniquet. And I've used that same expression. Like, if you're involved in making metal go fast, you need to be ready to deal with the consequences of that. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any legal training. I did listen to your last episode about the concealed carry, the CCW safe, which I
Hmm.
found that very interesting. So I've been a member of another organization, but after listening to that podcast, I'm going to go look at the terms of that organization and compare it to CCW safe, because I liked a lot of the things that I heard. But in my mind, the first thing I've got to take care of is me, right? I've got to, and I've got to make sure that I survive this encounter, because my adversary may have good shot placement too. And so the first thing I want to do is make sure that I don't bleed out. The second thing I want to do is make sure that if there are any innocent bystanders who have been harmed, that I can take care of them if possible.
Hmm.
And all of this stuff, when I think about this and when we talk about what should I carry, this is all predicated on the idea that I can make a 911 call and EMS is going to arrive in a quick relatively quickly, right? Like 10 minutes or less,
Yeah.
15 at the most. We're not hanging out on a farm for an hour waiting for EMS to come. That's a different story. But the third thing is the guy that I shot, if possible, I'm going to render aid to him. Even if he's dead, I'm going to render aid to him if possible. Because in my mind, and again, this isn't legal advice, I don't know if this works, but in my mind, when I have to stand before a jury of my peers, because I'm going to assume that's going to happen, I want to be able to say and demonstrate that I did not have murderous intent. Like, I didn't go into that encounter with the desire to kill anyone. I was trying to stop somebody from doing harm to others or myself. And hopefully they're not dead and I saved their life, right? And then they get to suffer the judicial consequences of their actions, right? But I'm gonna do everything I can to prevent that person from dying. And so by rendering aid first to myself to make sure that I can then take care of other people and manage the situation, and then to the innocent bystanders, but then finally, to that person, my adversary, I'm going to render aid to them as well. I think that's the moral thing to do, and it
Yeah.
also, like I said, I can stand there and honestly say it was not my intention to kill that person. I just wanted to stop them from hurting myself or others.
Right. And I think that a jury, particularly with your training and your degrees, license, and so forth, they would look at you more harshly if you didn't do it.
Yeah, as long as that person is no longer,
A
a
threat.
threat, right?
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Make sure that they're disarmed. Ideally, there's again, I'm expecting that I'm in a place where the police and EMS are going to be relatively close
Yeah.
by. Right. Making sure that the scene is safe. That's the most important thing in any kind of emergency situation. Right. Like in tactical combat casualty care, the first phase is care under fire when you're still receiving effective fire from your adversary. And we say the best medicine or the best combat medicine is fire superiority, right? So the first thing you want to do is control the threat, right? Whatever the situation is, control the threat. Make sure the chainsaw is off. Make
Hmm.
sure the car is not moving anymore, right? Whatever the danger is, you want to secure that. Make sure it's no longer harming your patient, and make sure it's not going to harm you because whatever hurt them can hurt you.
And you mentioned, it is also just the Christian thing to do, or I mean,
Yeah.
probably people of any religion. Honestly, there's plenty of theologically based, responsibility that goes with not wasting a life.
Right.
Because, and if maybe that person, I don't know, will have a second chance someday and turn into a good person. But I mean,
Yeah.
Yep.
at the moment, yeah, you're right, and that is the right thing to do. And by the way, dear listeners, keep in mind that neither Ken or I are lawyers either.
No.
And everything on this show is simply opinion and discussion and is
Yeah.
not meant as legal advice. But I think everyone knows that. At least we've said it enough times. Okay, so stemming off that
Yep.
comment, Dr. Onifer, let's talk about, you said that people maybe have equipment because they were issued it, but then again, these are guys who also have some training. I carry a tourniquet in my computer bag everywhere I go. I'm the only person I know who does that.
Hmm.
Uh, but the amount of tomorrow, I'm taking my $200 8-hour required course to renew my CCW in California. And let's not get
Good
started
golly.
on,
I know.
yes, $200. And that's before the ammunition
Every
costs.
2 years, you're required to do it every two
Yeah,
years.
yeah, every 2 years, so that I can spend a bunch of money to exercise a freedom. That's a separate topic. But
Yes.
I will tell you that in aggregate, the amount that I have spent on medical training is
Hmm.
probably not more than that in my life. And as Ken just said, we have to do this every 2 years in California.
Yeah.
So, how many people have walking around with it they think is a good tourniquet and maybe they got it off Amazon? It probably isn't that good. Maybe a bandage or two, and they think they're good, but they have no training.
Right.
How many people have gone to the effort of actually getting the training who aren't required to get it? They've done it, not as part of a military organization that requires
Right.
a certain amount. Just average guy, civilian, who is a gun enthusiast, maybe has his tourniquet. Has How many of those people have gotten training?
Probably very few.
Hmm.
So since the Stop the Bleed campaign has started, that number continues to go up. Now, so a little bit of history. 1996, September of 1996 is
Hmm.
when Captain Frank Butler, who was uh, the SOCOM surgeon, the Special Operations Command surgeon, the senior medical officer for all special operations in the U.S. military, wrote an article called Tactical Combat Casualty Care in Special Operations, right? And so that article said tourniquets first because up until that point, it was direct pressure, elevation, pressure points, and tourniquets as a last resort. And Frank looked at the data. He and several other people looked at the data and said, these are preventable deaths. We looked at mostly Vietnam data and said these are preventable deaths, and tourniquets could have saved these people's lives. And that was literally and figuratively life changing.
Mm.
It took probably 15 years, maybe we'll say 10 years for that to start to really gain traction. And the big thing that drove that was GWAT, right? Once we started, right, engaging in regular combat operations and people were starting to get injured and bleed, it became increasingly recognized that this stuff really works, right? So that has taken time to filter through into the civilian medical world. So again, the Boston Marathon bombing.
Hmm.
Those two brothers that were involved in that, they were in a shootout with some Boston police. One of the police officers, I think I have this story correct. One of the police officers was shot and was bleeding, and a bystander who had prior military training applied a tourniquet, and the dispatcher told them to take the tourniquet off,
Wow.
and that police officer died. So because at that time there's a lot of people who think like tourniquets are bad, and if you don't need a tourniquet and you decide to leave it on for 6 or 12 hours, yes, it is bad. But when you're bleeding out from an extremity injury and you're only going to have it on until you get to the hospital and you get to surgery and they can fix that, then it is absolutely life saving. You've got minutes. If you've got a significant arterial bleed, you've got
Hmm.
minutes before you can go into hemorrhagic shock and die. So I think it's it's great. It's getting traction that people are recognizing the need for that kind of care. And there's been a lot of exposure in movies and things like that. There's been a lot of press that has shown, people surviving because of tourniquets. And the Rangers in particular, Rangers are great. You tell them to do something and they're going to do it, right? And so the Rangers demonstrated this. They had the lowest combat casualty rate of died of wounds rate in all of recorded military history. It's like 1.8%, because from the top on down, and I think this was when General McChrystal was in charge of the Rangers, he said, everybody is going to know tactical combat casualty care, and this is my leadership priority. And so everybody knew how to do it, and the Rangers have really led the way on it. And so they went to Afghanistan, and they saved a lot of lives because they did it. And that really proved to everyone that, okay, this stuff really works. And again, some people will push back and say, well, this isn't combat. Your blood doesn't know the difference,
No.
right? Your cardiovascular system and your brain and your heart don't know the difference about what is making all of the blood go on the ground. It just knows that it doesn't have any more blood and that doesn't like it. And so, if you can control bleeding through a less drastic measure, great. Then you probably don't need a tourniquet. But I would rather put the tourniquet on first and get that bleeding under control and then reassess later when I've determined that I don't need it. And again, also considering this in the context of I can make a 911 call and I expect an ambulance to arrive in, 10 or 15 minutes.
Hmm.
Right.
So, given that, you did talk percentages earlier about the likelihood of being able to save a life and so on. Did those numbers accrue to amateurs and untrained people, or did those numbers accrue only to medical professionals in terms of your
Um,
probability of saving a life if you really don't have training? And I guess as a side topic, how many people who have some training, it just is gone when they need it because they're under stress and they just forget all their training.
sure. So so there's a couple things there. So unfortunately, there's not really good data to tell me who's doing it and how well they're doing it. Um, and sometimes there's a concern of will a lay person, will a bystander cause more harm than benefit? um look back to CPR, right? If you check and that person doesn't have a pulse, right?
Hmm.
You check, they don't have a carotid pulse, they're not breathing, they're unresponsive. Well, you've got enough evidence to make a treatment decision, right? If you've got nothing else, because if you start pumping on their chest and they jump up and say, leave me alone, then you know to stop, right? You've so and if you've got somebody who's laying there on the ground unconscious in a pool of blood and you can identify where that bleeding is coming from and you can stop that bleeding, you're saving their life. Right now, I mean, all states have good Samaritan laws.
Hmm.
um, and I would encourage your listeners to check the good Samaritan laws in their state to see if there's any particular, I said you live in the People's Republic of California, so they could, I don't know what they have there. Here in America, most other states, are going to be nice to you if you try and help your neighbor. I'm being a little sarcastic.
Ah.
Um, so, but your Good Samaritan laws are gonna protect you from liability. But the likelihood that you're gonna hurt somebody worse than them dying, right, is probably pretty small. Um, so I'm less concerned about the layperson who's not well trained, um, not doing it correctly, I'm less concerned about that than I am about somebody not doing anything at all and then a victim, bleeding to death. The other question is, the importance of training, right? Obviously, I'm going to tell you that it's important to train. And when we talk about later on, we talk about different kinds of equipment. There's some equipment that is easier to use than others,
Hmm.
and makes the training, I wouldn't say less necessary, but it's not as critical for you to be as well trained on it because the device itself is set up to help you. But like anything else in a crisis situation, right? You're gonna react the way you train, and if you've never trained to do anything, you're not going to do anything. Or if you've trained to do wrong things, whereas every time you go to the range, as soon as you empty your magazine, you do a speed reload and then holster your weapon and then pick up your brass because you got to keep the range clean. Chances are good that when you're in a gunfight, you might do that. You might holster your weapon while getting shot at to pick up brass. Nobody's thinking about, I need to clean up the range. But for the last 150 times that you went through that drill, that's what
Hmm.
you did. And that's
Yep.
what you will just do. Right. So it's
Yep.
important for us to practice. One quick caveat or a point that I'll make is if you're going to practice with a tourniquet, which I recommend, you
Hmm.
really want to have a tourniquet. You want to have a training tourniquet. You don't want your life-saving tourniquet to be the one that you've practiced on 10 or 20 times because you can cause degradation of the material and increase the risk of tourniquet failure. I would rather keep my life-saving tourniquet separate and unplayed with, and then
Hmm.
have one that I use for training.
So I'm going to ask kind of the opposite question then.
Okay.
How many people who, have a modicum of either training or at least awareness, have a modicum of equipment, actually make things worse? Does that really happen in the real world? Like they try to help and they actually made it worse?
I look for data on that. I did some searching in the medical literature, and then I talked to my favorite AI search engine, and there are no real numbers on that.
So it's statistically, it's probably
It
so
probably
marginal, it doesn't
exists.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably exists. But again, the the harm that you might cause in saving someone's life is far less than the harm of you not saving their life and them dying.
Well,
Right.
yeah, and the reason I asked that question is I think that look, I'm Ken and I are both super squeamish, right? I mean, sight of blood, dude. I'm likelihood of
Yeah.
me fainting is really high. I mean,
Yeah.
and maybe that's actually another point, which is how likely are people just to basically go into shock or switch off when they're trying to render aid because they can't deal with it. Maybe the shock
Yeah.
comes later. But my thought is that, your likelihood of helping someone so far outweighs the risk of damage. And I think I want to sweep aside the idea that they're afraid to help.
Yeah, and like Craig, I've actually got an example of this. Like, I am, blood is not my thing, and that's why one of the reasons I never went into the medical field. However, I was out in my front yard about 10 years ago, and 85-year-old lady across the street trips, falls, and rips open her I don't know, the temporal artery next to the side of your right eye socket
Yep,
someplace.
temporal artery.
Yep, and she's squirting all over the place. Okay, this is not my thing. Okay, I
And
rush her.
real quick,
Yeah.
Ken,
Yeah.
you don't want to use a tourniquet there.
No, you do not. No,
Okay,
I
just
knew
just to be
that.
sure. Hey, neck tourniquets are very effective at stopping bleeding, but there are
Hmm.
some treatment
Some
consequences.
side things, yes. So I remember putting left and right hand, clamping my hands together on each side of her, temples, both
Yeah.
sides, and holding them together as tight as I could, and then asking the other person, call 911 right away. And the fire department was great. They showed up with the paramedics in about 6, 7 minutes. That was great. I was holding it on there. I'm all now covered in blood myself. But and then as soon as the paramedics were there, I said, "Look, guys, it's a squirter." And they go, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Look, when I take my hand off here, you're gonna know." And sure enough, then they took over, and I said, "Thank you very much." And
Yep.
I walked back across the street to my house, washed my hands, and I had to sit down because this is not my thing. And I go, I don't want to move for like 20 or 30 minutes. I mean, this is just not my thing. But I did what I needed to do in the situation, and
Yeah.
I felt proud about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I would like to think that the majority of people are going to try and help another person who is in need.
Yeah.
And right, if you've got a little bit of training and you understand what is the right thing to do, what's the correct thing? I don't mean morally right, but the technically correct thing to do. You're far more likely to do it than if you've never entertained that thought, you've never practiced with it, you've never seen it. Um, and so, so where do I get that training, right? Like the American Red Cross does first aid classes. Sometimes your YMCA will do first aid classes. Sometimes your local fire department will do first aid classes. You can look, in your community and see what organizations. But the Stop the Bleed campaign, if you go to the Stop the Bleed website, you can search for classes, and a lot of those are free. There will be people who do the Stop the Bleed classes for free.
Hmm.
You can purchase the equipment from them and or another place, but the training is available. I encourage when we were at SHOT Show, I encourage everybody that I talked to that owned a gun range or a gun store and people that teach, like they're shooting instructors, and especially if they're teaching concealed carry, I encourage them to consider bringing a Stop the Bleed course as part of their, as part of the training that they offer.
Hmm.
And, obviously some of this is business, right? Because we sell medical stuff. So I want you to sell my medical stuff. But I think it's important for people to at least have the opportunity to purchase good, reliable, safe medical equipment. Because like you mentioned, Craig, you can go and buy 4 tourniquets for 17 or $18 on Amazon, and they're crap. They are 3D printed in an adversarial country. They're not quality equipment. They will fail. I would not trust my life to them.
And if a person needed to, well, if they felt the need to get maybe a little bit more training, let's say I want to use hemostatic gauze or a chest seal
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, that maybe is outside the boundaries of the Stop the Bleed, training and equipment. If they want to go that next level, I'm assuming that there are probably plenty of resources that would give you that as well. Because, like, for example, I've heard the hemostatic gauze is almost as problematic misused as it would be if you didn't use it in the first place.
Um, I'm not sure about that. I've not heard that. I do know that packing a wound, being trained how to pack a wound, is part of the Stop the Bleed campaign. So you can in extremis in an emergency situation, right? If you've got nothing else, I'm going to rip up your shirt and I'm going to stuff that wound, right? Because I need to. We say you need to fill the bowl. Now, in most of your civilian encounters, you're probably talking about handguns,
Hmm.
maybe shotguns. So we'll assume not slugs, but you're not going to have the same sort of tissue damage that you would get with a high velocity rifle round, right? Something that's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
multiple times the speed of sound, like two or three
Yeah.
thousand feet per second, like an AR-15 or an AK-47.
It causes a large cavitation event.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
going to cause those smaller bullets are going to, or really slower bullets. That's the issue. It's the speed more than the size
Hmm.
when it comes to the cavitation. Um, they're going to cause a lot less tissue trauma. You're going to get a lot less, probably get a lot less cavitation, and so you can pack that wound easier. Um, I packing a wound to somebody, like packing a wound in somebody, is going to be painful to that person,
Hmm.
right? So I mean that's just a thing to consider, but that's the important thing that you need to do. If you don't have a tourniquet, or you don't think the bleeding's bad enough that it needs a tourniquet, but they're still bleeding, then you've got to pack the wound. You've got to fill that cavity so that you can apply proper pressure,
Hmm.
or hopefully you've got a hemostatic dressing where you're going to have some sort of chemical reaction with the blood or the tissue that's going to create the clot for you.
Okay, so Dr. Onifer, you in the pre-show discussion, you had mentioned that Stop the Bleed had a correlation to, even though Stop the Bleed month is May, you said it ought to be March, and I guess that is also an acronym for something. What is? Can you explain that, please?
Sure. So with tactical combat casualty care, which Stop the Bleed grew out of, the acronym we use is MARCH. Those are your initial life saving steps. So M is massive external hemorrhage. that needs to be treated with a tourniquet. Right. So massive external hemorrhage. A is airway, making sure that the patient can breathe. R is respirations. And the injury that we're typically taking care of there is a sucking chest wound and really a tension pneumothorax. Um, so we can talk more about those two things later. C is circulation. So that's where I'm going to start replacing blood that you've lost. And then H is head injuries and hypothermia. Initially, it was just hypothermia, and then we rolled H's in head injuries as well. So hypothermia, low body temperature, is a big deal in trauma. It's part of a collection of things that happen to your body that can cause severe injury and death.
Hmm.
So March, when we talk TC3, tactical combat casualty care, we talk March. When you say March and TC3, those are kind of synonymous for those of us that do this thing. And so you may see other acronyms. Some people will say CABC or XABC, but they're basically it's basically March. It's basically the same thing. X would be external hemorrhage. C would be control the bleeding, whatever. But that's why I said Stop the Bleed month should be March, not May. I don't know why they made it May.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was trying to come up with an acronym for May, and I was struggling with that. The only thing I got was the Y, which would be Yo, sucker's dead, and that would be like
No.
about it. So now, if people want to, they're invigorated and they want to go get themselves a kit, but we don't know what a kit looks like. And by the way, I will mention to our listeners that Frugal Firearms Podcast has some rules for our guests. Rule number 7 is that you have to allow us to become familiar with the product that we're going to be discussing because A, talking about a product that we have no knowledge of is unethical. And B, we can't have a very intelligent conversation about something if we're simply not familiar with it. So nothing on this show is ever products that we're unfamiliar with. But we kind of stepped aside from that one in this case because Ken and I were discussing, and
Nope.
I would love to have taken some of Rescue Essentials equipment and tried it out on Ken, but he wasn't volunteering.
Willing to get shot? No.
No, no, the
No.
No.
chest seals, the hemostatic gauze, the
No.
tourniquets, none of it. He wasn't signing up for any of this. And
Nope.
I think he's derelict in his responsibilities as a show host for not volunteering thusly. But no, we did not test Rescue Essentials gear prior to you
No.
coming on this show because we couldn't find an adequate volunteer and I wasn't going to
Yeah.
do it myself.
Yes.
But so, Doctor, what do you think? What's a reasonable based on cost and based on volume? I mean, because if
Right.
it's too big a
Right.
kit, people ain't carrying it.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? And maybe prioritize that. Like if you're going to carry one thing, carry this, and then if the kit expands, you get more stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. So if you got one thing to carry, it's a tourniquet. That is the thing that's going to save. That is the thing that is most likely going to save someone from bleeding to death in any kind of traumatic emergency, right? And when I say tourniquet, I mean a limb tourniquet, right? So bleeding from the extremities, arms and legs.
Mm-hmm.
If you're bleeding from your abdomen or your chest, that's a whole lot harder to fix. We in the medical profession, combat medics and doctors and PAs that go in the field with combat troops, we have a tough time controlling those things. So I'm not expecting anybody, right, to do that. But extremity hemorrhage, which that's part of what we consider preventable death, a tourniquet is the first most important thing for you to have. So again, thinking about this in the March algorithm. Actually, let me take a quick step back because one of the other things when you ask like, okay, what kind of equipment should I have? I think about 3 things in particular. One, what's my population at risk? Right. So who are potentially going to who are the people that are going to potentially be injured? How many of them, right? That's the thing I want to think about. What kind of health risks do I have in this particular situation, right? These are my general rules. In this particular situation, I'm first and foremost worried about me, right? I'm worried about me getting shot or hurt, and I need to save my own life. And so that's the first thing. So what's my population at risk? My next question is, what are those hazards? What are the hazards that this person? And this is when you're building any medical kit, right, or any emergency kit, right? These are the things that I think about. So, what are the hazards or the threats? What are the things that I'm worried about? And again, in this situation, I'm worried about high velocity metal. I'm worried about a bullet or a fragment like piercing my body and making me bleed. And then the third thing is, what is your capability? What's your level of training? And what can you do? So it would be foolish for me to recommend a medical device that you've never been trained on, um, or a medical device that requires a specially trained medical person use. So I would not recommend that any one of your listeners. I would recommend against any of your listeners who don't have specific medical training carrying a needle for needle decompression of a chest injury, right? That's an invasive medical procedure that has significant risks if you do it wrong. I don't know if Good Samaritan laws would cover you. So I would not recommend that anybody carry one of those unless they have been trained, like they're an EMT or a paramedic. But a battle dressing, hemostatic agent, and certainly a tourniquet, those are things that I would recommend that people should carry.
So for those items, if those are the top line items, what does a person expect to spend on that kit? And I mean, obviously, Rescue Essentials is the source we're promoting here because you guys have,
Right.
only quality gear and not the 3D printed, from an adversarial country, stuff that looks the same as the quality
Yeah.
tourniquet, but in fact is not.
So, in looking at several of the kits that we have, if you want we'll call an IFAC, an individual first aid kit. If you want an
Mhm.
IFAC that's got everything, like let's say you're an EMT or you've been through, a course and you know how to put on a chest seal and pack a wound and all that stuff. One of those kits is probably going to cost you in the neighborhood of $100 or more. Now you can, depending on what you have access to and what you already have in your medical kit at home, or what you can purchase in the pharmacy near your home, or whatever. You can get an IFAC in a nylon pouch that's been sewn and that makes it really easy to carry, or you can buy a refill. So all that stuff will come in a Ziploc bag,
Mm.
and that may be a little less money, and that way you can stash it in your everyday carry gear as you see fit. But I would say the minimum things that you want to have, again, tourniquet, first most important thing. The next would be hemostatic gauze. And then the third thing after that would be some sort of bandage or wrap or pressure dressing that you can wrap around an extremity to hold that gauze in place. Those are the three most important things.
What types of
Scissors.
tourniquets? Oh, scissors.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
scissors are really helpful to cut away clothing and to expose the wound so that you can properly treat it. I would recommend against using a pocket knife to shred open somebody's clothes, especially
Yeah.
in that crisis situation. Lots of adrenaline, moving really fast and strong. There's a risk of you stabbing, your patient. That's not a good idea. If you've never been trained how to put a nasal pharyngeal airway in an airway that goes in a person's nose, if you've never been trained to do that, don't try it, and don't carry it. But the gauze, yeah, and so most of these first aid kits, like right now, our compact first aid kit, which doesn't have the hemostatic gauze but does have regular gauze, it's on sale for like $70, and that actually comes with a nylon pouch. So that's a pretty good deal.
Hmm.
And by the way, listeners, I will point out that Dr. Onifer, if you listen to the end of the show, has offered graciously a 10% discount on Rescue Essentials gear, a good to the end of the year, not just to the end of May here, which is, oh, by the way, in 2 days,
2 days.
but good to the end of the year. And I did want to point out, it would be easy to overlook this. If people are following along and looking for Rescue Essentials, you can certainly just Google that. But the URL is rescue-essentials.com.
Hmm.
So rescue-essentials.com is their homepage.
Now, unfortunately, the kits that are on sale, I don't think the discount code will work with the kits on sale, but you're
Okay.
actually saving more money with the sale price,
Great.
because they're anywhere from like 15 to 20% off, including, so there are Stop the Bleed kits as well. And the Stop the Bleed Advanced kit has everything we talked about. It has a tourniquet, It has some quick clot gauze. It has some regular gauze. It's got a trauma dressing. It's got a chest seal. So, and it's even got a hypothermia blanket, and it's got gloves. That's another thing, you might want to consider having is gloves.
Hmm.
So you can get all the stuff for under $100.
Yeah, and compare that to the cost of, I mean, geez,
It's nothing.
a few boxes of ammunition
Yeah,
and you save
exactly. It's a
somebody's
few.
life. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
or your own.
And
it's an investment.
and
Yeah.
again, you're more likely to use this stuff than you probably are to use your gun,
Hmm.
or at least to fire your gun. Like I said, like you may brandish your gun or just, expose it and let somebody know, hey, F around and find out, right?
Hmm.
But when it comes to actually pulling the trigger in an extremist situation, that's I think statistically speaking, that's a lot less likely to happen than for you in any context to come across somebody who's bleeding.
You're right. And it's been said time and
Hmm.
time again, and people just don't, unfortunately, seem to listen to the message, and they're probably left with a great deal of regret when they could have saved someone's life and they didn't.
Yeah.
How hard is it for a person to use their IFAK on themselves? I mean, I imagine you have to maybe experiment
Yeah.
a little bit with this.
So as far as tourniquets, right, we train for self-application. We train to put them on other people, but we also train to put them on ourselves, right? That's an important part of training with a tourniquet. And the overwhelming majority of your tourniquets are what we call windlass tourniquets, right? So it's a strap with a bar that's fed through the strap, and you twist the bar, and then it locks in place. A properly applied tourniquet hurts. Like after a little while, it's going to probably be your 10 out of 10 pain, which means I'm not thinking about much of anything else right now except this tourniquet hurts really bad. So once you get that on, you're probably not going to be doing a whole lot much else. But the tourniquet is actually not particularly hard to put on. Coming from the perspective of being in the military, where you've got relatively fit, relatively strong people, being able to crank that windlass and get it to the right tension isn't that hard. My mom, who is in her 70s and has carpal tunnel and arthritis in her hands, not going to happen, right? She's not going to spin a windlass. So there are other kinds of tourniquets that are use a ratchet mechanism, a mechanical advantage, which can be used for people who don't have that kind of strength, right? So I'm going to talk mostly about windlass tourniquets because those are the most common ones that you find.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing that's an issue with the application of the tourniquet is that when you put it on and you pull that strap and you cinch it down before you even start to spin that windlass, you've got to have a you've got to take out all the slack and have good tension before you start, because otherwise you're going to start spinning that windlass in the air, and you may run out of nylon to spin before you get proper tension if you start with the tourniquet loose. And that's why one of my favorite tourniquets is the SAM XT, SAM Medical tourniquet, because it has a pre-tensioning mechanism. You pull on that, and it catches a latch, and it pops, and it puts these two little teeth into the strap to lock it in place to let you know that, hey, I've got adequate tension and I'm not going to lose it. It won't slip out. And then just two or so turns of the windlass will usually make it work.
I was going to say, besides cheap ones, are there any styles that you would recommend against using?
Something that's just purely so okay. So there's a couple of tourniquets that are like bungee cords.
Hmm.
I would not use that. The tourniquet, the width of the tourniquet strap needs to be at least an inch and a half. That the data that we have, and you can find some tourniquets that have a narrower strap than that, but an inch and a half is typically the minimum width of the strap that you need. Otherwise, it increases the pain and it increases the risk of injuring that healthy tissue under the strap. You get what we call tissue necrosis. So the skin gets damaged if the strap is too narrow because it applies the pressure. It applies it in too linear a force. A wider strap actually helps distribute that force better. It probably closes off the blood vessel better, and it probably hurts less as well. Like if I took a blood pressure cuff, if you have a blood pressure cuff, you have a
Yeah.
tourniquet, right? So
Yeah.
you put that blood pressure cuff on and you pump it all the way up to like 200 or 250, and you've got a tourniquet. And that's uncomfortable,
Yes, it is.
right?
Yes.
But it doesn't hurt as much as like a CAT, right? A combat application tourniquet, or a SAM XT, or a soft T, a Special Operations Forces tourniquet, right? So those straps, like, but a blood pressure cuff is big and bulky and expensive and cumbersome, right? It weighs a lot.
Well, no one's walking around with those.
Right, exactly. So a decent tourniquet, a good reliable tourniquet is probably going to cost you between $25 and $45. I'll say between 30 and 40 typically. But some of them you can get them for a little cheaper than that, like depending on the store and maybe if they have a sale. But if you're paying like $15 or less for a tourniquet, chances are good. I don't know that I could trust it unless, like I
Right.
said, unless it's on sale, right? Like, hey, it's normally $40, and we're getting rid of them because like a new generation of tourniquet has come out, something like that. But typically, cheap tourniquets are not something I would rely on.
I was just gonna say I've been looking at like the cat tourniquet, and it seems like every time I look at them again, and I have several of them, but it comes out and it goes, oh, now up to Gen 3, Gen 4, Gen 5. I think there's Gen
Gen
7
7.
now, and I'm like,
Yep.
7? What was wrong with 6? I don't know. I'm glad they're
Um,
improving it though.
yeah, I think the big thing with 7, from 6 to 7, was reinforcement of the windlass, to make sure that the windlass didn't break. So again, the likelihood of a tourniquet, if you take a tourniquet out of the wrapper
Hmm.
and it's not been sitting in like triple digit heat in the middle of the desert for the last 6 years, right? But you have a new tourniquet that's been in your everyday carry bag for the last year or so. It's still wrapped in the plastic, or it's in a nylon case, right? So that it's not exposed to the elements, and the nylon, the fabric hasn't been, rubbing up against something and degrading. That tourniquet's going to work.
Hmm.
Now, if you take that out every Saturday and you practice with it a couple times, after a while, you're going to get breakdown of the material. It will still probably work, but I wouldn't, like I said before, I wouldn't want my training tourniquet to be my life saving tourniquet.
And remember, folks, this is frugal firearms, not cheap firearms. And if
Right.
you consider the value proposition of
Right.
if some people are squeamish about spending a few $100s on a medical kit, I guarantee you, when you see your own blood spilling out on the floor, you're gonna be thinking, yeah, maybe I'd spend a couple $100s to put that blood, keep that blood in me.
Best money you can spend is on a good unit. Yeah.
So I typically carry a satchel that I have my everyday carry kit in, right? And because I'm a concealed carry, guy, I have a tourniquet, I have a chest seal, I have a needle for needle decompression because I know how to do that, and I
Hmm.
have all the things in there to treat March. And people gave me a hard time. They were like, your man purse. And I'm like, it's a satchel. And they said, it's a man purse. And I'm like, and I opened it up and I said, man purse does not have this. And I start laying out my tourniquet and my chest seal and my trauma shears, right? And all this stuff. This is a satchel. Jack Bauer carries a satchel. I carry a satchel, right? And so fast forward, there's a group of us we're on a trip for a medical conference, and we went to a Walmart, and I'm walking through Walmart, and this guy comes walking by, and he's got blood on his hands, and he's walking towards me. He's a Walmart employee, and I said, "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" And he says, "It's not my blood; it's her blood." And he just storms off. I'm like, "Okay, I don't know what that means," but I follow his blood trail, and we get to the produce section, and there's this elderly woman who has tripped over the banana cart. Didn't trip on a banana peel, but she caught her foot on the wheel of the banana cart and fell down, hit her head, and now she's got a scalp wound. And scalp wounds bleed like stink.
Yep.
And so she's bleeding all over the place. And I kneel down. I said, "Hi, my name's Dana. I'm a doctor. Can I help?" And she says, I get permission from the patient to assist her. And I turned to one of the Walmart employees and I said, "Has somebody called 911?" They said yes. And I said, "Do you guys have a first aid kit?" They said, "Yes, somebody's going to get it." Because I have my satchel, I have my stuff, but I don't want to use my stuff. I don't have to.
Right.
And so they come and they bring their first aid kit, and their trauma bandage looks like a woman's sanitary napkin. It's not, the equipment that's in their first aid kit is not very helpful to me at the moment. So I sigh and I reach into my bag and I pull out my nice Israeli trauma bandage and I wrap her head with the trauma bandage. And EMS shows up and I give them a report and they're looking at me like, okay, who the heck are you? And I tell them I'm a military doctor. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And I walk off and I go meet my friends out in the car and they're like, what the heck took you so long? And I was like, this lady split her head open, was bleeding on the floor. And they're like, what'd you do? I'm like, I went into my satchel and got my trauma bandage and I stopped her bleeding. Satchel.
Well
So
done, sir. Well done.
so it happens every now and again. And you know, my wife and I was trying on a sports coat in a really nice store. We were in Vegas for another conference, and I put it on, and I'm like, it fits, but the sleeves are kind of short. I'm like moving around and everything, and the guy's like, lots of guys come in here, sir, and and they swing their arms around. But really, how when you're wearing a sports coat like that, when you're all dressed up, like how often do you really need to do that kind of thing? And I look at my wife, and she looks at me, and she looks at him, and she's like, yeah, he gets himself into stuff all the time. So I just it, because I've been trained to respond to crisis. Right.
Yeah.
It's a thing I've been doing emergency medicine since I was 16 and I volunteered, as an EMT when I was a kid. So I've been doing this for a long time. It's my natural inclination. And I say that because I think a lot of the people, back to some of your previous questions, I think a lot of the people that are going to be concealed carry holders who are actually going to engage an adversary in a crisis situation are the kinds of people, and I may be I know that I'm chronically optimistic, but I think they're the kind of people who are going to respond to any kind of crisis, to any kind of emergency, and they're going to want to help people and do the right thing, right? Because they're Americans, and that's what we do,
Hmm.
right? So I think it's, again, just back to, I think it's really important that people know, if nothing else, whatever other first aid or medical, you need to, you learn, right? Learn how to put on a tourniquet, learn how to do CPR. And if I had to choose between those two, I would want to learn how to put on a tourniquet.
You did not mention in the March, well, it's not part of the acronym, but something that we see in the deserts around Southern California, and I think across the South, and I'm not saying it's just a West Coast or Southwest thing, but maybe they're not life-threatening, but for some people they might be bee stings and venomous snake bites. Is that something worth adding to the EDC?
So I would say
Like those little suction things or something?
no. So let's go with bee stings first. If you know that you have anaphylaxis, like you
Hmm.
get all swollen and you get the rash and right, you have trouble breathing, you need to carry an EpiPen, right?
Hmm.
I would not recommend that someone carries an EpiPen to use on an innocent bystander, someone that they don't know, right? Again, that that you can kill somebody by giving them an inappropriate dose of epinephrine. So I would not recommend that for use on someone else. I would recommend you carrying that if you need it or if your kid needs it, then
Hmm.
yes, right? Like my wife gets hit with fire ants, and the last time that happened, she was in an ambulance, right? So I have an EpiPen. My son, he's been stung and bit by something. Like he got bit by a black widow, nothing happened, right? So like he's kind of impervious. I did a little experiment when he was about 4 or 5. We were walking through the woods and I was teaching him about poison oak and poison ivy. And I took a poison ivy leaf and I rubbed a little bit on his leg just to see if he had the rash because not everybody's sensitive to it. He didn't get a rash. I did, right? So so when it comes to like bee stings, like venomous insects, if you know that you are allergic, carry an EpiPen, and your doctor will prescribe those for you. And most insurance companies, especially if you've got a documented allergy, they'll cover that. When it comes to snakes, all that cut the wound and suck the blood and all that stuff, no, don't do any of that. So there's the only real treatment for snake bites is antivenom. So what you want to do is, if at all possible, you keep the bit extremity, you keep it lower than the heart.
Hmm.
You keep the patient relaxed so that they're not aggressively circulating their blood. If you can carry them out of that environment, right? That's what you want to do.
And no
So
tourniquet, right?
no tourniquet. Now, for neurotoxic snakes, was that the coral snake?
Probably coral snake. And yeah.
Yeah. So not. what's the word I'm looking for? Rattlesnakes. What is that?
Right.
Yeah. So not those vipers.
Yep.
So not vipers, but for the neurotoxic snakes, which are pretty uncommon here in the U.S. But
Right.
for those, you put a tourniquet on because you want to restrict the bleeding. Now, if you're going to put a tourniquet on an extremity, you've got to put a tourniquet on. You don't want to put on what we call a venous tourniquet, where you prevent blood from returning to the heart, but you don't stop blood from going in, right? So you're closing off the veins, which are much lower pressure, but you're leaving the arteries open, which are much higher pressure. Because then what happens is you start building up blood in that vessel, and you can cause what we call compartment syndrome, which can be devastating to the muscle in that limb and requires surgical correction when it happens and potentially leads to amputation.
Mm.
So if you're going to put a tourniquet on, you're going to put a tourniquet on. But that's only if you're treating a neurotoxic snake, and that's pretty uncommon. So, like I said, so that sucking out the blood, those little suction cup doohickeys,
No.
we in medicine do not recommend those.
And the ones that are like syringes that actually
Yeah.
those are no good
No.
either.
No.
Okay. Huh. Are there any other misconceptions about EDC gear that are common?
Oh. I thought you were going to say any
How much time do
misconceptions
you
about
have,
medicine.
right?
No. Misconceptions about the narrow topic of EDC gear that you should set aside.
The other thing too is, I've got all this trauma gear. I've got a trauma kit in my car. I got a trauma kit in my satchel. I got a trauma kit in my van. I got one at home. I got like my range bag. But what's the thing that happens all the time? Little cuts and scrapes.
Yeah.
Right. So when you have your trauma, like in my EDC, you can get a little mint tin, or a little Band-Aid box. Put some Band-Aids in there. You can put some antiseptic wipes in there to clean off the skin. Not a big fan of triple antibiotic ointment. Really Vaseline just to cover the skin. If you've got a normal immune system for a fresh wound, the most important thing is to irrigate it. Just use low pressure water. You get a water bottle, like a 500 milliliter, bottle of drinking water. Use your knife, poke a couple of holes in the top so that you got a little irrigation there. Clean out the wound, and then just Band-Aids are good to go. Where you can buy like steri strips or skin closure things. So taking care of minor injuries is important because those happen a lot more often.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Rescue Essentials Gear is your affiliation. Any other things on the website that you want to point out, specifically, certain products that people might find of interest or something like that? And by the way, listeners, I mean, Dr. Onifer's, spent a good deal of time with us today. It is a fantastic show. And honestly, they deserve your business. I mean, we've already talked about the fact they have stuff on sale. At the end of the show, I'll reveal the discount code that he has generously offered. I would strongly recommend you go to their site and browse. But, when you're filling that cart up with stuff to buy, the discount code he offered is a one-time use. So you want to make sure you fill the cart completely so you get the 10% off on the things that are not sale items. So any other highlights, product highlights you'd like to bring to their attention?
So it's actually a really good website. If when you go to the main page up across the top, you got drop downs for medical kits, components, hardware, all sorts of stuff. But if you click on, say, medical kits, and you say, oh, let's see here, school and public access, then you can refine that. There's a search engine will help you refine that. How many patients do I want to treat? How do I want to carry that? What tourniquet do I want to use? And so the website will help you to select, because there's a ton of options. We will custom build kits for various agencies and organizations, military, federal, local, state, all of them. And if it's a good kit design, we'll keep it on the website because somebody else might want it too, right? Rather than, building a brand new custom design and say, oh, wait, we really like that Border Patrol kit that you guys have. And so we've got some that are designed specifically for concealed carry. So you can search the website and check that stuff out.
Yeah, and I'm actually doing that right now. And one thing I've never seen this before, the T-ring finger cut kit. And because I was talking about my daughter being a woodworker, and losing a finger in a table saw could happen easily. And this thing, I'm actually going to buy some of these for my daughter here.
Using your 10% discount, of course.
Yeah, that's the it's basically like a red
Yeah, the
plastic
red circle
ring
thing, and you
with
just push
the
it right on.
yeah, yeah, just slides right over your finger. It works really well.
Yeah.
As we close out here, without grossing out us, your hosts or the listener base, you got any funny, entertaining, anecdotal stories you'd like to share?
You know, I was thinking
You
about that,
probably
right?
have a
Because a lot
hundred
of
of
the
them, right?
well, I've got a bunch of stories that like I don't know how appropriate they would be for the general audience. I mean they involve bodily fluids and things like that. Real quick, back to when you were talking about people being squeamish and stuff like that, right? Again, that's where training helps. When you do a stop the bleed course,
Hmm.
you're going to learn how to pack a wound with a wound packing model that should have fake blood in it. So you're going to get a little bit of exposure. When I do that, I like to warm up the blood simulant so that like it's nice and I'll put it in a crock pot for a while so it's nice and warm. Gets people kind of wigged out. But I was thinking about like what's a funny story, like a medical story, and I had a hard time coming up with one. The one that it's I don't know how related to any of this is, probably not at all. When I was a corpsman, and when I first started with Marine Force Recon, and I was going through the what's called the Basic Reconnaissance course. It's the primary school to learn that stuff, and we were on a patrol. And the short version of that story is we got really wet and really cold, and we weren't supposed to have gotten really wet. And so, as we're moving down this draw down into this little valley, and the temperature's dropping, and we're dropping down below the fog layer, and it's like miserable. And the guy behind me, he's like, Doc, what? He's like, spoon? Like, heck yeah. Right. And so we get into our patrol base, and me and this guy are snuggled like nut to butt for the rest of the night. We took MRE heaters and put them in between us because on these patrols, you travel, we say travel light, freeze at night. And so we spent that night, it was the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. And we spent Wednesday night before Thanksgiving snuggled up, nut to butt.
Were you little spoon or big spoon?
We would rotate. We would rotate. So that was November of 1992.
Mm.
Fast forward, sometime 2018, I'm teaching faculty in the family medicine residency program at Camp Lejeune Naval Hospital. And I'm rounding in the morning with my interns and residents. And we go in there to see this female patient. And we're talking to her, and her husband's standing next to her at the bedside. And I look at him, and he looks at me. And we kind of look at each other. And he's like, Dana? I'm like, Gary? And we both went, holy cow. And he turns to his wife and he says, this is the guy I spooned with. So I'm like, hey, I'm not the only one who celebrated that as a wonderful moment of male bonding.
And her reaction was?
She goes, what? She just looked at him and was like, you still tell that story?
Any appearances you have coming up, Dr. Onifer, either other websites you want to promote, or just this is your free time to promote yourself a little further?
Rescue Essentials you will frequently find Rescue Essentials at EMS and fire rescue and police trade shows, around the country and honestly around the world, but all around the country. So I'm not the only one. There's a bunch of people that will be, at the table somewhere. I tend to focus on the military stuff. So
sounds good. All right. Hey, well, this has been an outstanding show. We want to thank you for your time. Again, we'll go ahead and reveal it now. The Rescue Essentials 10% discount code, good until the end of the calendar year, is very simply Frugal10. And 10 is the digits, 10. So you go there, you help them out, give them a little bit of love for spending the time, to get you guys ready for the real world, quite frankly.
Indeed. We'd very much like to thank Dr. Onifer for coming on and sharing his experiences with us, especially with those of us who are less medically inclined. He's given some tremendous points and things that I'm going to be thinking about, and definitely things I'm going to be purchasing from Rescue Essentials that will assist those of us who are into firearm shooting sports, as well as those are woodworkers, because there's a lot of stop the bleed. I think is probably the single most important thing we really ought to start focusing on. So, Craig, what did you think?
Well, I mean, do you drive a car?
Yeah.
I mean, that's another area where there's a lot of opportunity to use this knowledge that we don't have, because both of us probably, I mean, hell, he talked about being through the Stop the Bleed courses. I mean, I damn near pass out in those courses.
Right.
I'm so bad at this, and
It's
I
not
guess
my
that's
thing.
no,
But
it's not our
yeah.
thing at all. And I
But
mean, even
I do believe that a person can rise to the occasion, as I thought I
as you
did.
did.
Yes, I rose to the occasion. I got everything. Held her. She's not bleeding out. Called the paramedics, and I handed over to the paramedics. And then I just, okay, I'm gonna go sit down, wash up, and sit down because this is more than I want to do. There you go.
So what we're good at, you and I, we're good at podcasting.
We're good at
That's what we're good at.
podcasting.
And to our listeners, hey, if you like that content, you like the quality of the people we have coming on. And by the way, I got a couple really good ones that are just on the cusp
Hmm.
of being featured. Yeah, that like and subscribe thing that takes you like 2 seconds to do, like
Please
by
do.
hitting a button, do that because that helps the algorithm get us more notoriety. And by the way, as the audience size grows, we get better participants.
Hmm.
And when we get better participants, you listeners get better shows. So
Indeed.
how do you find the website is easy, frugalfirearmspodcast.com. Very simple. If you want to reach out to us, frugalfirearmspodcast@gmail.com. See, we've made this very easy.
Yep.
And again, tell your friends. And by the way, to talk about word of mouth, there's been a number of downloads just in the last few weeks that
Hmm.
I haven't really been posting very much, and they're just happening. Welcome to new listeners in Singapore,
Hmm.
in Poland, on the tropical island of Guam, across various places in Europe. Now, we did have one that I think it may have simply been where someone had their VPN located, but we had one in Algeria that mapped out in the Sahara Desert, I think.
Right.
So I don't know if some person was just bored and had a satellite link and wanted to listen to
Whatever.
something as they're
Yeah.
riding their camel across Algeria. But I mean, no disrespect to people in Algeria, none
No, if you
whatsoever.
want to listen, we welcome you to.
But I was suspect that that one could have simply been a VPN location that someone
Could
else
be.
chose.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, do get the word out because honestly, again, it helps you guys, help us help you get better shows. So with
Indeed.
that, I think we're about done. Next one's coming up. There is one of my favorite optics companies is going to be featured very soon. Look for that coming up. And another one, hopefully quite soon, from a company that's not normally thought of as a frugal option, but they absolutely are a very high-end trigger manufacturer. So be looking for those shows as well. Anything else to close out there, Ken?
That'll do it. I appreciate your time, everyone. See you soon.
All right. Good night, folks. Tomorrow, I'm wasting 8 hours learning stuff I already know to do my CCW course. Thank you very much.
You should move to America.
Yeah, a free state. I know, someplace.
You know what? I think it's a case of you can run, but you can't hide.